Marcus Reed stared at the data pad in his hands, trying to convince himself that the trembling in his fingers was due to the ship's minor gravitational fluctuations and not the fact that he was about to make first contact with an alien species whose cultural protocols he'd memorized but never actually tested in practice. The diplomatic vessel Harmony hummed around him with the quiet efficiency of humanity's most advanced technology, but Marcus felt like he was piloting a paper airplane through a cosmic hurricane. "Officer Reed," came the crisp voice of Commander Patricia Hayes over the intercom, "your Zephyrian counterpart has arrived in Laboratory 7. Please report for initial collaboration briefing." Marcus straightened his uniform and checked his reflection in the polished metal surface of a nearby panel. 6 months of preparation, 3 different cultural sensitivity courses, and a crash study in xenobiology had led to this moment. He was representing not just the Earth Diplomatic Corps, but humanity's first formal attempt at scientific collaboration with an alien civilization whose technological advancement made human achievements look like finger painting. The corridors of the Harmony buzzed with nervous energy as Marcus made his way toward Laboratory 7. Other diplomatic personnel moved with the purposeful stride of people trying to look more confident than they felt, while the ship's AI provided cheerful updates about atmospheric conditions and cultural exchange protocols that everyone had already memorized. Marcus paused outside the laboratory door, took a deep breath that he hoped projected competence rather than panic, and activated the entry panel. The first thing that struck him about Lydia Veltar was how remarkably humanoid she appeared, despite originating from a planet 17 light-years from Earth. Her skin held a subtle luminescence that seemed to emanate from within, like moonlight filtered through crystal, and her ears swept back in elegant points that gave her an almost ethereal quality. Her silver hair was arranged in what appeared to be a complex braid that probably involved mathematical principles Marcus couldn't begin to understand. "Officer Reed," she said, her voice carrying an accent that sounded like music filtered through wind chimes. "I am Lydia Veltar of the Zephyrian Scientific Collective. I have been looking forward to this collaboration with considerable anticipation." Marcus extended his hand for what he hoped was the appropriate human greeting gesture, then immediately second-guessed himself. Had the cultural briefings mentioned anything about Zephyrian contact protocols? Was a handshake insulting? Intimate? A declaration of war? Lydia solved his dilemma by accepting the handshake with what appeared to be genuine curiosity, her grip firm and warm despite her crystalline appearance. "The pleasure is entirely mine," Marcus replied, proud that his voice came out steady. "I've reviewed your research on interspecies behavioral analysis. Your work on cognitive pattern recognition across different evolutionary paths is remarkable. You have read my publications?" Lydia's expression brightened with what Marcus was learning to recognize as Zephyrian surprise. "Most humans in the exchange program seem more interested in our technological capabilities than our theoretical research." "Well, I'm probably not most humans," Marcus said, then immediately wondered if that sounded arrogant or self-deprecating or somehow offensive to alien sensibilities. Lydia tilted her head in a gesture that was either thoughtful consideration or polite confusion. "Indeed. Your psychological profile suggested as much, though I confess I find human behavioral patterns endlessly fascinating. Your species demonstrates such interesting contradictions between logical analysis and emotional impulse." She moved toward the laboratory's central workstation with a grace that made Marcus question whether Zephyrians experience gravity the same way humans did. Her movements were fluid and precise, like someone who had spent years perfecting the art of existing in three-dimensional space. "Our initial project involves comparative analysis of problem-solving approaches," Lydia continued, activating what appeared to be a holographic display system that made human-computer interfaces look primitive by comparison. "I am curious to observe how human intuitive reasoning compares to Zephyrian systematic methodology." Marcus watched her work, noting how her fingers seemed to dance across controls that responded to gestures he couldn't quite follow. The holographic display bloomed into a three-dimensional maze of data points and connection nodes that hurt his eyes to look at directly. "This is beautiful," he said honestly. "I mean, the data visualization. It's like art and science had a baby and raised it on pure mathematics." Lydia paused in her manipulations of the display, turning to look at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. You perceive aesthetic beauty in information architecture. Doesn't everyone? Marcus replied, then realized that question probably had a very different answer when applied to alien psychology. Most Zephyrians appreciate elegant data structure, but we do not typically describe it in terms of artistic beauty or reproductive metaphor. There was something in her tone that suggested she found his perspective intriguing rather than offensive. Your species has a remarkable tendency to personify abstract concepts. For the next several hours, Marcus found himself falling into an easy working rhythm with his alien colleague. Lydia's systematic approach to problem-solving complemented his more intuitive style in ways that surprised them both, and her obvious delight in discovering new patterns of human reasoning made Marcus feel less like a diplomatic obligation and more like a genuine research partner. The trouble began when Lydia dropped her data pad. It was a simple accident, the kind of minor mishap that happens in laboratories across the galaxy when someone tries to manipulate too many holographic controls while holding physical devices. The pad clattered to the floor beside her workstation, and Lydia bent over to retrieve it with the same fluid grace that characterized all her movements. Marcus's brain, which had been functioning perfectly well for 28 years of human existence, chose that moment to experience a complete system failure. The sight of Lydia bent over, her form-fitting scientific garments doing absolutely nothing to disguise the perfect curves of her posterior, triggered a response that bypassed every cultural sensitivity training session he'd ever attended. "Sweet merciful universe," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "That is an absolutely perfect ass." The words left his mouth before his conscious mind had any say in the matter, carried by the kind of involuntary honesty that strikes humans at the worst possible moments. Marcus felt his face flush with horror as he realized what he'd just said, his career flashing before his eyes in a cascade of diplomatic disasters and cultural misunderstandings that would probably result in interstellar war. Lydia straightened slowly, the data pad in her hand, and turned to face Marcus with an expression that he expected to be outrage, disgust, or the kind of professional disappointment that ended careers and possibly species alliances. Instead, she smiled. It was not the polite diplomatic smile Marcus had seen during their formal introduction, nor the interested expression she wore when discussing research methodology. This smile was something entirely different, slow, knowing, and tinged with what Marcus's terrified brain could only categorize as intrigue. "Perfect," she repeated, her voice carrying a note of scientific curiosity mixed with something that made Marcus's remaining functional brain cells stage a complete revolt. "That is a very specific qualitative assessment. What criteria are you using for this evaluation?" Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish experiencing atmospheric pressure for the first time. I didn't mean to. Oh God, I'm so sorry. That was completely inappropriate and unprofessional, and I should probably report myself to the commander before you." "Report yourself for what?" Lydia interrupted, moving closer with the kind of focused attention she had previously reserved for data analysis. "For expressing honest appreciation of aesthetic qualities. That seems counterproductive to scientific observation." "Aesthetic qualities?" Marcus repeated weakly. "Physical form is a legitimate subject of biological study," Lydia said matter-of-factly, though her smile suggested this was not entirely a clinical discussion. "Your spontaneous response provides interesting data about human visual processing and attraction patterns. I had not realized that humans possessed such direct evaluation mechanisms." Marcus felt reality doing something uncomfortable around the edges. "You're not offended?" "Should I be? Your assessment suggests that by human standards, my physical development meets optimal parameters. From a biological perspective, this is valuable information about interspecies compatibility factors." "Interspecies compatibility factors," Marcus echoed, wondering if he'd somehow fallen into an alternate universe where accidentally commenting on an alien woman's posterior was considered scientific methodology. "Indeed. Though I confess, your specific phrasing was more evocative than the clinical terminology I typically encounter in research contexts." Lydia's eyes held a gleam that Marcus was beginning to suspect had less to do with scientific curiosity and more to do with personal interest. "Tell me, Officer Reed, are all humans so refreshingly honest in their observations, or am I witnessing a unique behavioral pattern?" Marcus stared at her, his diplomatic training warring with the growing realization that his embarrassing slip might have accidentally opened a door he'd never expected to find. "I think," he said carefully, "that I might be somewhat unique in my tendency to say exactly the wrong thing at exactly the wrong time." "Fascinating," Lydia murmured, making notes on her data pad with the enthusiasm of a researcher who had just discovered an entirely new species. "And do you often find yourself making such evaluations of your colleagues?" "Never," Marcus said with complete honesty. "I mean, I've never worked with anyone who looked like, that is, human colleagues don't usually." "Oh, this is not getting better." Lydia laughed, a sound like silver bells mixed with quantum harmonics. "Officer Reed, I believe we are going to have a very interesting collaboration." Marcus watched her return to the holographic display with renewed energy, occasionally glancing back at him with expressions that suggested she was conducting an entirely different kind of research than their official project parameters indicated. He had the distinct feeling that his accidental honesty was about to make their working relationship significantly more complicated. Marcus arrived at Laboratory 7 the next morning with the grim determination of someone who had spent most of the night rehearsing apologies and practicing professional behavior in front of his bathroom mirror. He'd run through every possible scenario, from formal diplomatic reprimands to being shipped back to Earth in disgrace, and had settled on a strategy of aggressive professionalism designed to pretend yesterday's incident had never happened. Lydia was already at work when he entered, her silver hair caught in what appeared to be an even more complex arrangement than the day before. She looked up from her holographic displays with a smile that immediately shattered Marcus's carefully constructed plan to maintain clinical detachment. "Good morning, Officer Reed," she said with the cheerful tone of someone who had apparently spent zero time agonizing over interdisciplinary propriety. "I have been reviewing our preliminary data from yesterday's session. Your behavioral patterns present some fascinating research opportunities." Marcus set down his equipment with the careful precision of someone trying very hard to appear normal. "Research opportunities?" "Indeed. I have been corresponding with colleagues on Zephyr Prime about your unique observational responses. Dr. Vex Mordain, our head of xenobiological studies, finds your direct evaluation methodology particularly intriguing." "You told other people about what I said?" Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure begin to crack around the edges. "Only in the context of scientific inquiry," Lydia assured him, though her expression suggested she was enjoying his discomfort more than strict academic objectivity would warrant. "Your spontaneous assessment provides valuable data about human attraction patterns and cross-species aesthetic evaluation. We rarely encounter such unfiltered responses in formal diplomatic exchanges." Marcus watched her move around the laboratory with what he was beginning to recognize as deliberate choreography. Every movement seemed designed to test his ability to maintain professional focus, from the way she stretched to reach upper control panels to her habit of bending over equipment with what appeared to be scientifically unnecessary frequency. "Are you conducting some kind of experiment on me?" he asked finally, after the third time she had found reason to retrieve items from floor-level storage compartments. "Would you object if I were?" Lydia replied, straightening with a data crystal in her hand and an expression of innocent curiosity that fooled absolutely no one. "That depends. What kind of experiment are we talking about?" "Behavioral observation, primarily. I am documenting human responses to specific visual stimuli under controlled laboratory conditions." She moved to the central workstation, her movements flowing with the kind of grace that made Marcus suspect she was showing off. "Your reactions provide excellent baseline data for understanding human attraction mechanisms." Marcus realized he was being studied like a laboratory specimen, and the most disturbing part was that he wasn't entirely sure he minded. "So every time you position yourself in various ways, you're collecting data on how I react?" "Precisely. Though I confess the research has taken some unexpected directions." Lydia activated another holographic display, this one showing what appeared to be complex behavioral analysis charts. Your responses demonstrate consistency patterns that suggest genuine aesthetic appreciation rather than purely biological impulse. There's a difference? Oh yes. Biological attraction typically follows predictable physiological markers. What you demonstrate is more complex: appreciation of form, movement, proportion. It suggests cognitive processing beyond simple mating response patterns. Marcus stared at the charts, which seemed to be tracking everything from his eye movement patterns to his respiratory changes. You've been monitoring my vital signs? Standard protocol for behavioral research. Though I should mention that your readings yesterday showed some interesting anomalies when I performed specific movements. Lydia's smile took on a quality that Marcus was learning to find both thrilling and terrifying. Would you be willing to participate in more controlled testing? What kind of controlled testing? Before Lydia could answer, the laboratory door opened to admit a tall Zephyrian male whose presence immediately shifted the room's atmosphere from playful scientific flirtation to serious academic scrutiny. His crystalline features were more angular than Lydia's, and his expression carried the authority of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any given room. Dar. Veltar, he said in accented English that carried formal precision, I trust your research is proceeding according to protocol. Dr. Mordain, Lydia replied, her playful demeanor instantly transforming into professional courtesy. Allow me to introduce Officer Marcus Reed, my human research partner. Marcus, this is Dr. Vex Mordain, head of the Xenobiology department. Marcus extended his hand, noting how Dr. Mordain's grip was firm but distinctly cooler than Lydia's had been. Pleasure to meet you, Dr. Mordain. Indeed. I have been reviewing Dr. Veltar's preliminary reports about your collaboration. Your behavioral responses show remarkable potential for our broader research into interspecies compatibility factors. Compatibility factors? Marcus glanced at Lydia, who was suddenly very interested in adjusting her holographic displays. The Zephyrian Scientific Collective has been studying the feasibility of long-term human-Zephyrian cultural exchange, Dr. Mordain explained with the tone of someone delivering a formal presentation. Your spontaneous reactions to Dr. Veltar provide valuable data about the potential for successful interspecies relationships. Marcus felt his understanding of the situation shift uncomfortably. Are you saying that my observations are being used to evaluate whether humans and Zephyrians can get along romantically? Not romantically, necessarily. Though physical attraction is certainly one component of successful long-term partnerships. Dr. Mordain moved to examine Lydia's data displays with professional interest. Your responses suggest that humans are capable of appreciating Zephyrian aesthetic qualities, which is promising for future diplomatic relationships. Dr. Mordain, Lydia interjected, her voice carrying a note of warning, I believe Officer Reed might benefit from a more gradual introduction to our research parameters. Nonsense. Humans appreciate directness, according to our cultural studies. Officer Reed, would you be willing to participate in expanded behavioral testing? The data could prove invaluable for interspecies relations. Marcus looked between the two Zephyrians, noting how Lydia seemed uncomfortable with her colleague's approach while Dr. Mordain appeared to view him as a fascinating laboratory specimen. What would this expanded testing involve? Marcus asked carefully. Systematic exposure to various stimuli under controlled conditions, with comprehensive monitoring of physiological and psychological responses. Dr. Veltar would serve as the primary test subject for visual attraction protocols, while we evaluate your reactions across multiple scenarios. Test subject? Marcus repeated, his attention snapping to Lydia. It would be entirely professional, she said quickly, though her expression suggested she had significant reservations about her colleague's approach. Standard scientific methodology with appropriate controls and safeguards. The initial phase would involve proximity testing, Dr. Mordain continued with the enthusiasm of someone outlining a particularly promising research proposal. Shared meals, recreational activities, extended collaboration periods. We need to understand how human Zephyrian attraction patterns develop over time. Marcus felt reality taking another sideways step. You want to study whether Lydia and I develop romantic feelings for each other. Romantic feelings, physical compatibility, emotional resonance patterns, long-term partnership potential, Dr. Mordain listed with clinical precision. The data would inform policy decisions about future exchange programs and potential colonization partnerships. Colonization partnerships? Theoretical, at this stage. But if humans and Zephyrians prove compatible for long-term relationships, it opens fascinating possibilities for shared planetary development and cultural integration. Lydia moved closer to Marcus, her expression apologetic. I should have explained the broader research context earlier. My interest in your behavioral patterns is not purely academic. Not purely academic, Marcus repeated slowly. I find myself genuinely curious about you, beyond the scientific parameters. Your directness, your aesthetic sensibilities, your emotional expressiveness, these are qualities I had not expected to encounter in human subjects. Dr. Mordain nodded approvingly. Excellent. Personal investment in the research outcomes will provide more authentic data. Dr. Veltar, I want comprehensive reports on all interactions, with particular attention to emotional development patterns and physical compatibility indicators. Dr. Mordain, Lydia said firmly, I believe this research should proceed at a pace comfortable for all participants. Officer Reed has not yet consented to expanded behavioral analysis. Marcus looked at Lydia's concerned expression, then at Dr. Mordain's scientific enthusiasm, then at the data displays showing detailed analysis of his reactions to an alien woman's physical attributes. Let me get this straight, he said finally. You want to study whether I can fall in love with Lydia by systematically exposing me to situations designed to increase romantic attraction, while monitoring my vital signs and documenting everything for scientific publication. That is a remarkably accurate summary, Dr. Mordain confirmed. Are you willing to participate? Marcus considered his options. He could decline and return to standard diplomatic protocols, maintaining professional distance while completing his assigned cultural exchange duties. He could report the situation to Commander Hayes and let the diplomatic corps handle the ethical implications of being studied like a laboratory animal. Or he could admit that the prospect of spending more time with Lydia, even under scientific observation, was considerably more appealing than he was comfortable acknowledging. What would happen to the research if I said no? He asked. We would select another human participant, Dr. Mordain replied matter-of-factly. The thought of some other human being exposed to Lydia's deliberately provocative research methods sparked a reaction in Marcus that surprised him with its intensity. And if I said yes? Then we begin Phase 2 immediately. Extended proximity testing, beginning with a shared meal this evening. Dr. Mordain consulted his own data pad with satisfaction. I have already arranged for a private dining facility with comprehensive monitoring equipment. Marcus looked at Lydia, who was watching him with an expression that mixed scientific curiosity with something that looked remarkably like hope. All right, he said, surprising himself with the decision. Let's see what your scientific method can discover about human-Zephyrian compatibility. Lydia's smile was radiant enough to power the ship's navigation systems. Dr. Mordain made satisfied notes on his pad. Excellent. Phase 2 begins at 1800 hours. Dr. Veltar, please prepare your observation protocols. As the department head left the laboratory, Marcus found himself alone with Lydia and a growing realization that he had just volunteered to be studied, analyzed, and documented while potentially falling in love with an alien scientist. Are you certain about this? Lydia asked quietly. Dr. Mordain's methods can be quite intensive. Marcus considered the question seriously. Honestly? No, I'm not certain about anything. But yesterday you asked me if I often find myself making evaluations of colleagues, and I told you never. That's still true. There's something about you that's different, and if your scientific method can help me understand what that is, then I'm willing to be your research subject. Even if it means having every aspect of our interactions documented and analyzed. Even if, Marcus confirmed, then grinned. Besides, How often does someone get the chance to contribute to groundbreaking interspecies research by going on scientifically monitored dates? Lydia laughed, the sound even more musical than he remembered. I believe, Officer Reed, that you are about to discover just how thorough Zephyrian scientific methodology can be. The private dining facility that Dr. Mordain had arranged turned out to be less intimate restaurant and more scientific laboratory disguised as a social space. Marcus counted at least 17 different monitoring devices artfully concealed among what were supposed to be decorative elements, and the ambient lighting appeared to be optimized for behavioral observation rather than romantic ambience. This is cozy, he commented to Lydia as she entered wearing what appeared to be formal Zephyrian attire that somehow managed to be both elegant and strategically designed to test his powers of concentration. Dr. Mordain believes in comprehensive data collection, she replied apologetically, taking her seat across from him at a table that was almost certainly equipped with sensors capable of monitoring everything from heart rate to subconscious micro-expressions. I attempted to suggest a more natural environment, but he insisted on controlled conditions. Marcus studied the menu, which appeared to offer cuisine from both Earth and Zephyr Prime with detailed nutritional analysis and potential compatibility ratings for each dish. Should I be concerned that my dinner choices are being evaluated for their impact on interspecies attraction patterns? Only if you select the Terran chocolate dessert, Lydia said with a smile that suggested she was only partially joking. Preliminary research indicates that human chocolate consumption significantly increases emotional receptivity and physical responsiveness. Good to know. I'll save that for when I want to skew the results. Their conversation flowed with surprising ease despite the clinical setting, moving from professional topics to more personal territory as the evening progressed. Marcus discovered that Lydia's interest in human behavior extended far beyond scientific curiosity, encompassing genuine fascination with human creativity, emotional expression, and what she described as the beautiful chaos of intuitive decision-making. Zephyrian society values systematic analysis and logical progression, she explained during the third course, which had been selected specifically for its supposed ability to encourage honest communication. We approach problems methodically, gather comprehensive data, and implement solutions based on probability matrices and risk assessment algorithms. That sounds remarkably efficient, Marcus replied, noting how the monitoring equipment seemed to increase its activity level whenever Lydia leaned forward during their conversation. Efficient, yes. But also predictable. Your species demonstrates an approach to existence that is simultaneously chaotic and effective in ways that challenge our theoretical models. Her eyes held a gleam that Marcus was learning to associate with intellectual excitement mixed with personal interest. Take your initial comment about my physical attributes, for example. Marcus nearly choked on his drink. Are we really going to discuss that during our scientifically monitored dinner? It provides an excellent case study. A Zephyrian would have processed visual information, evaluated it against cultural appropriateness protocols, and either expressed a carefully considered compliment according to social guidelines or maintained professional silence. You bypassed all systematic analysis and expressed immediate honest appreciation. And accidentally created a diplomatic incident. Did you? Or did you accomplish in one spontaneous moment what formal diplomatic protocols might have required months to achieve? Lydia reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his hand in what might have been accidental contact or carefully planned proximity testing. Your directness cut through cultural barriers and established a level of honest communication that our standard exchange programs rarely accomplish. Marcus felt his understanding of the situation shift again. You're saying that my embarrassing lack of filter was actually effective diplomacy? I am saying that your emotional honesty created possibilities that pure logic might have dismissed as improbable. Her hand remained in contact with his, and Marcus noted that several monitoring devices were now blinking with increased urgency. Which brings us to the primary question of this research. Which is whether the attraction patterns we have documented can develop into genuine emotional connection, or if they represent merely surface compatibility based on physical appreciation. Marcus looked at their joined hands, then at Lydia's luminous eyes, then at the discreetly placed cameras that were undoubtedly recording every moment of their interaction. How exactly do we test that? Phase 3 protocols involve extended proximity evaluation under increasingly intimate circumstances, came Dr. Mordane's voice from speakers concealed somewhere in the ceiling. Tomorrow you will begin cohabitation simulation exercises. Marcus and Lydia both looked up in surprise. Cohabitation simulation? Marcus asked. Shared living quarters for 48 hours, with comprehensive monitoring of domestic interaction patterns, conflict resolution approaches, and compatibility stress indicators. Dr. Mordane's tone carried the satisfaction of someone announcing a particularly elegant experimental design. If you can successfully navigate close-quarters living arrangements, it suggests potential for long-term partnership stability. You want us to live together for 2 days while you monitor everything we do? Lydia asked, and Marcus detected a note in her voice that suggested she was not entirely comfortable with her colleague's methodological enthusiasm. Not everything, Dr. Veltar. Privacy barriers will be maintained for personal hygiene activities and sleep periods. However, all social interactions, shared meals, recreational activities, and domestic collaboration will be documented for analysis. Marcus felt reality taking another of its increasingly frequent sideways steps. This is moving pretty fast for a research project that started with an accidental comment about someone's posterior. Actually, Lydia said thoughtfully, the rapid progression serves an important scientific purpose. Extended evaluation periods allow subjects to adapt their behavior to create artificial results. Compressed timelines produce more authentic responses. So you're saying that if we take too long to figure out whether we actually like each other, we might start pretending to like each other just to make the research work? Precisely. Human psychology demonstrates remarkable adaptability to social expectations. By accelerating the evaluation process, we minimize the risk of performance bias. Dr. Mordane's voice returned with additional details. Your shared quarters have been prepared in Section C, Level 7. All necessary monitoring equipment has been installed, along with recreational facilities designed to encourage natural interaction patterns. You will begin cohabitation at 0800 tomorrow. After Dr. Mordane signed off, Marcus and Lydia sat in contemplative silence, the weight of what they had agreed to settling around them like a comfortable but significant blanket. Are you having second thoughts? Lydia asked quietly. Marcus considered the question seriously. The rational part of his mind was cataloging all the reasons this was a terrible idea, the complete lack of privacy, the professional implications, the possibility that he was falling for someone whose interest in him might be purely academic. The less rational part of his mind was focused on the way Lydia's hand felt in his, the genuine warmth in her eyes when she looked at him, and the growing certainty that whatever was developing between them existed independently of scientific protocols and monitoring equipment. I should be, he said finally. This whole situation violates pretty much every principle of healthy relationship development I've ever heard of. We're being studied like laboratory specimens, our interactions are being documented for posterity, and we've known each other for exactly 36 hours. And yet I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about my directness cutting through cultural barriers. Maybe the fact that this is completely artificial and scientifically monitored actually makes it more honest somehow. We can't pretend to be anything other than what we are, because everything is being recorded and analyzed. Lydia smiled, and Marcus realized that her expressions had become as familiar to him as breathing, despite their brief acquaintance. That is a remarkably optimistic interpretation of experimental behavioral analysis. Well, I'm a remarkably optimistic guy. Sometimes. He squeezed her hand gently. Besides, how many people get to fall in love under laboratory conditions? If nothing else, it'll make for interesting stories. Are you falling in love, Marcus? The question was asked with scientific curiosity, but Marcus detected undertones that suggested the answer mattered to her beyond research parameters. He looked at her luminous skin, her elegant pointed ears, her eyes that held depths he was only beginning to explore, and felt something in his chest that was definitely not compatible with objective scientific analysis. The monitoring equipment probably knows better than I do at this point, he said. But if I had to give a preliminary assessment based on available data, yes. I think I might be. Lydia's smile was radiant enough to trigger several proximity sensors. Excellent. That will make tomorrow's cohabitation simulation much more scientifically interesting. Marcus laughed, marveling at how completely his life had transformed since making one careless comment about an alien scientist's perfect posterior. Lydia? Yes. When this research is finished and Dr. Mordain publishes his findings about humans' Epherian compatibility, do you think there might be room in the results for a footnote about two individuals who discovered that sometimes the best scientific discoveries happen when you stop trying to control all the variables? I think, Lydia said, standing from the table with graceful movements that still made Marcus's monitoring equipment register appreciative responses, that such a footnote would be the most important finding of the entire study. As they left the dining facility together, Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. Tomorrow he would be living with an alien woman under scientific observation, participating in research that might determine the future of interspecies relations. He found himself looking forward to it with an enthusiasm that probably registered on every monitoring device in the vicinity. Marcus stood in the shared quarters that Dr. Mordain had prepared, marveling at how someone had managed to transform standard diplomatic housing into what appeared to be a cross between a luxury hotel suite and a sophisticated behavioral research facility. Every surface seemed to contain embedded sensors, the lighting could apparently be adjusted to optimize various psychological states, and the recreational area included games from 17 different planetary cultures. It's like living inside a very comfortable panopticon, he observed to Lydia, who was examining what appeared to be a Zephyrian meditation alcove equipped with biometric scanners. Dr. Mordain is thorough in his research methodology, she replied diplomatically, though Marcus detected a note of exasperation in her voice. I may have underestimated his enthusiasm for comprehensive data collection. Their first few hours of cohabitation proceeded with the awkward politeness of two people who were attracted to each other but acutely aware that their every interaction was being recorded for scientific posterity. They prepared breakfast together with careful coordination, made polite conversation about their respective cultures, and maintained precisely appropriate physical distance while the monitoring equipment tracked their stress levels and compatibility indicators. By mid-morning, Marcus was ready to admit that scientific romance was significantly less romantic than advertised. This isn't working, he announced during what was supposed to be a recreational activity period but felt more like a performance evaluation. They were playing a Zephyrian strategy game that involved manipulating holographic patterns while sensors analyzed their problem-solving compatibility, and Marcus was losing spectacularly. The game. You are actually demonstrating remarkable intuitive strategies, even if your tactical execution needs refinement. Not the game. This. Marcus gestured at the monitoring equipment surrounding them. The scientific approach to figuring out whether we like each other. It's turning everything into data points and behavioral analysis instead of just being human. Lydia paused her manipulation of the holographic interface, her expression thoughtful. What do you mean by being human? I mean messy and unpredictable and honest about things that don't make logical sense. Marcus stood up from the game table, noting how several sensors adjusted to track his movement. When I first saw you and made that completely inappropriate comment, it wasn't because I had analyzed your physical attributes against some systematic aesthetic framework. It was because you were beautiful and I forgot to engage my brain before opening my mouth. And you consider this a superior approach to systematic evaluation? I consider it a more authentic approach. We're so busy generating data about our compatibility that we're not actually experiencing whatever compatibility we might have. Lydia deactivated the game interface and moved closer to Marcus, her luminous skin catching the artificial lighting in ways that still made his pulse quicken despite 3 days of scientific observation. What would you suggest instead? Marcus looked around at the monitoring equipment, then at Lydia's curious expression, then made a decision that was either brilliantly intuitive or spectacularly stupid. I suggest we conduct our own experiment. Not Dr. Mordain's systematic behavioral analysis, but something that tests what actually matters for people who might want to spend time together. Such as? Such as whether we can have a real conversation without worrying about what the sensors are recording. Whether we can cook a meal together without calculating optimal collaboration patterns. Whether we can just exist in the same space like two people getting to know each other instead of research subjects generating data. Lydia tilted her head in the gesture Marcus had come to associate with her processing unexpected information. You want to ignore the scientific protocols. I want to supplement them with what humans call the human factor, the acknowledgement that some things can't be reduced to data points and probability matrices. Marcus moved toward the quarter's central seating area, deliberately ignoring the sensors that tracked his path. Come sit with me. Not because Dr. Mordane's proximity testing protocol says we should, but because I want to talk to you without wondering what my vital signs are telling the monitoring equipment about my emotional state. Lydia joined him on the couch with a smile that suggested she found his proposal intriguing rather than scientifically heretical. What would you like to talk about? Tell me something about yourself that wouldn't show up in your research files. Something personal and maybe slightly embarrassing that has nothing to do with interspecies compatibility studies. Something embarrassing? Lydia's smile widened. That is not typically included in Zephyrian social interaction protocols. Exactly. Tell me something that's not protocol. She was quiet for a moment, and Marcus watched her expression shift from scientific curiosity to something more vulnerable and genuine. I have been studying human behavioral patterns for 3 years, she said finally, but my interest was not entirely academic. Zephyrian society is ordered. Predictable. Everyone follows established patterns for education, career development, social relationships, life progression. I became fascinated with humans because you seem to approach existence with such beautiful chaos. Beautiful chaos. Humans make decisions based on feelings, pursue relationships that defy logical compatibility assessments, create art that serves no practical purpose, and find joy in experiences that would be considered inefficient by Zephyrian standards. Her voice took on a note of wistfulness that Marcus had never heard before. I envied your ability to be spontaneous and emotionally expressive. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of their situation. So when I made that ridiculous comment about your posterior, I was actually demonstrating exactly the kind of spontaneous emotional expression you'd been hoping to observe. More than that. You were demonstrating it in response to me, personally, rather than as abstract behavioral data. Lydia moved closer to him on the couch, and Marcus noted that he had stopped caring what the monitoring equipment made of their proximity. For the first time in my career studying human behavior, I was not just an observer but a participant. And how did that feel? Terrifying and exhilarating and completely contrary to everything I had been trained to expect from scientific research. She looked directly into his eyes, and Marcus realized that whatever was happening between them had moved far beyond the scope of Dr. Mordane's compatibility study. I found myself hoping that your attraction was personal rather than simply biological response to aesthetic stimuli. Marcus reached for her hand, no longer caring about sensor readings or data collection. It was personal. Is personal. You're brilliant and curious and beautiful, and you approach the world with this combination of scientific rigor and genuine wonder that makes me want to show you everything I've ever found interesting just to see how you'll analyze it. That is not very scientific assessment criteria. No, it's not. It's human assessment criteria. It's the kind of evaluation that happens when someone stops trying to be objective and starts admitting that they've found someone they want to spend time with, regardless of what any compatibility study might conclude. Lydia was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her processing his words with the same careful attention she applied to research data. Marcus, she said finally, what if Dr. Mordane's study concludes that our compatibility ratings are suboptimal? What if the data suggests that human-Zephyrian relationships are not viable for long-term success? Then Dr. Mordane's study will be incomplete, because it will have measured everything except the most important factor. Which is whether two people care enough about each other to make the effort to understand differences, work through problems, and build something together that's stronger than the sum of their individual parts. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. All the scientific analysis in the galaxy can't predict whether two people will choose to love each other. The word love hung in the air between them like a challenge to every monitoring device in the room. Marcus watched Lydia's expression as she processed the implications of what he'd just said. Love, she repeated thoughtfully. That is not a concept that translates well to Zephyrian systematic analysis. Because it's not systematic. It's messy and irrational and wonderful and completely immune to scientific methodology. Marcus smiled at her. Which is why I think Dr. Mordane's research is missing the point. What point? That the most important scientific discovery isn't whether humans and Zephyrians can be compatible in theory, but whether specific humans and specific Zephyrians can choose to build relationships based on caring about each other as individuals. Before Lydia could respond, Dr. Mordane's voice emanated from the monitoring system with obvious excitement. Fascinating developments, Dr. Veltar. The emotional resonance readings from this conversation show unprecedented depth and authenticity. I believe we have achieved a breakthrough in understanding human relationship formation patterns. Marcus and Lydia looked at each other, then at the nearest sensor array, then burst into simultaneous laughter. Dr. Mordane, Lydia called out, I believe Officer Reed has just demonstrated that your research methodology, while scientifically rigorous, cannot account for the most significant variable in interspecies relationship success. Which variable is that? Individual choice. The decision two people make to value each other beyond any scientific assessment of their compatibility. There was a pause from the monitoring system, then Dr. Mordane's voice returned with a note of professional intrigue. Are you suggesting that emotional attachment supersedes systematic compatibility evaluation? I'm suggesting, Marcus said, standing and drawing Lydia up with him, that your study has been asking the wrong question. Instead of whether humans and Zephyrians can be compatible, you should be asking whether individuals from different species can choose to love each other despite cultural differences, biological variations, and scientific skepticism. And your conclusion? Marcus looked at Lydia, who was watching him with an expression that combined scientific curiosity with something much more personal and precious. My conclusion is that when you find someone who makes you want to be brave enough to be completely honest, smart enough to appreciate their intelligence, and generous enough to build something beautiful together, their species of origin becomes irrelevant. Beautifully stated, Dr. Mordane's voice carried a note of satisfaction. Though I should mention that your vital signs during this declaration are providing excellent data for future research into cross-species romantic attachment patterns. Marcus and Lydia looked at each other and started laughing again. Dr. Mordane, Lydia said, I believe our research has been successfully completed. Human-Zephyrian romantic compatibility is not only possible but demonstrated. However, I am withdrawing from the study to pursue individual research with Officer Reed. Individual research? The kind that doesn't require monitoring equipment, Marcus clarified. The kind where we figure out what comes next based on what we want rather than what the data suggests. As they walked toward the quarters exit together, Marcus reflected on the remarkable series of events that had led from an embarrassing comment to a scientific study to something that felt remarkably like the beginning of love. Lydia? Yes. When we write up our final report on this research project, can we include a recommendation that future compatibility studies allocate more resources to investigating the human factor? I think, she said, her smile radiant enough to overwhelm every sensor in the vicinity, that the human factor deserves its own research department. Outside their monitored quarters, the diplomatic vessel Harmony continued its mission of cultural exchange, while inside, two scientists from different worlds began the most important research project of their lives, figuring out how to love each other across the vast distances between stars.